Often quite paranoid of cheaters. I mean, if I lose a game, I just know my opponents are cheating. Either that or I'm wrong. But what is always really funny to me is when someone's cheating very blatantly. 99.6. 800 elo. So I found this account in the wild. In the wild of the Amazon rainforest, we find a chess cheater. They often only come out to look for a mate, which they will, of course, never succeed in. And it might be the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Right? Let's make fun of this person. That sounds mean. So our tragic protagonist started at the 400 elo rating level, which is, you know, fine. We all have to start somewhere. And I'm pretty sure they weren't cheating yet in this game. So let's take a look. So the game started with e4, knight f6. This is called the Alekhines or Alejochens defense. And it looks super strange because this knight is gonna get kicked around. And it's actually gonna get kicked around quite a bunch, either with c4 immediately or d4 and then c4. And it looks like black has just given up too much center control while also getting the knight kicked around a bunch. This is true, but black's main argument is that white is overextending by pushing all of these pawns, and then they're gonna chip away at the center. It's actually a fascinating opening. But white is 400, they probably don't even see this as a legal move, and they play knight to c3. Okay, you know what? Can't hate it. I'm gonna turn on the engine line, because we're not gonna learn much from this anyway. So here we see the move pawn to c6. Now, if I were to see a move like pawn c6 played against me, my thought process would be something like this. This pawn is keeping my knight from moving forward. Also what it's doing. With this move, we added a layer of control to the d5 square. For example, if black here plays a move like h6, now if we kick the knight, they can't go to that square. But after the move c6, they've enabled that. So here there are two candidate moves. Either we play pawn d4 to take control of the center, or we play the move pawn e5 anyway. White here play the move knight f3, and here we see pawn e6. This is simply a bad move. Why is this a bad move? These kinds of pawn structures are super flimsy. You are chronically weakening your dark squares. So there's two ways to take advantage of this. We can simply take control of the center, play normal logical development moves, or we can play a move like pawn e5, aiming to dislodge this knight. Now here what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't take. Right, you can see the evaluation drop. Like here, we're simply allowing black after, let's say, pawn d4, kind of get away with it a little bit. However, instead, we can play the move knight to e4. Now the line here continues. Black can play d6 themselves. We can play something like c4. This knight has to go, let's say, to c7. We can play stuff like pawn d4. And here our position starts to look really dominant. But they play d4. I don't mind it at all. And here we see bishop e4. Now bishop e4 establishes a pin, and it sort of comes with the tactical threat. We're exploiting the fact that the knight can't move, and thus knight takes e4 is on. It does come with some downsides though. Like for example here after the move bishop d3, it becomes really awkward for black to develop. Like for example you can't castle. Here e5 is simply way too strong. The knight gets kicked, and black might think they have something where they put in more pressure on the pinned piece. But here you simply have bishop h7 and you lose. Very simple line. King takes, knight g5, king goes back. Here you have queen h5. That if the rook makes space, here you can take on f7. Very standard chess ideas. For a lot of beginners watching, a signal that you can have to know when you can start making moves like this is when you have a pawn on e5, which is very often a rather strong attacking piece, and where you're in firm control of the g5 square, which as you can see is rather important for this line. Like if we can't play knight g5, our sacrifice doesn't really work. And maybe something to add, you can even do this with a bishop on h7 sometimes. Here the line goes slightly different, where we have to play the move pawn h4 first. Right, let's say black ignores this. Now we can still sacrifice. Point being that knight g5, it might be capturable by the bishop, but this opens up the h file. And here you're still getting checkmated. But okay, we don't see that. This person is rated 400. It's fine, you know? These ideas aren't per se the most complex thing in the world, but you have to have seen it like a couple times before you're able to replicate this, right? So instead they play pawn a3, which is just simply not a good move. Bishop takes knight, comes with check. We take back, we lose this pawn. Now, you can kind of see that in this line, the engine still thinks it's sort of okay. There is such a thing as superseding concepts. Yes, material is very important, but white is getting very active here. So let's say black continues grabbing pawns. Let's say queen d2, knight d4, and just to show how play could develop, pawn c4, knight goes back, short castles, queen g5. We almost have a full army developed, and black only has one piece out. We're down 2 pawns, but we have a lot of compensation for it. Just like in the tumbleweed variation of the good old King's Gambit accepted. King F2, best move on the board. They go bishop c5, well that's no problem over here. Our king just simply steps up and we take that pawn and we're completely winning. Yeehaw! Sorry. I was today years old when I figured out that this actually was an opening. However, black is also 400. So all they know is we have a pin, so I can take this pawn, which doesn't work because the bishop is still hanging and you've no compensation for the lost piece. And here is why I know white wasn't cheating yet. They played bishop d3. Why win a piece when you can attack one? So after they take, we take back, we block with the bishop, and then we take back. Now you can see black is up 4 points of material, yet the position says it's about -2. Why is that? We've won an exchange and 2 pawns. However, the exchange isn't immediately felt, and we do have some small compensation in the form of a lead in development. Now it's still not bad for black or anything, mostly because this queen is a little bit misplaced and we are actually up a lot of material. But this game isn't completely over yet. It's certainly not lost at the 300 elo level. So let's see. Black here realizes that they won a tremendous amount of material, obviously continued by playing in the center, developing their pieces and getting their king castled. No, I'm kidding, they play pawn a5. And you can see, hey, the evil is actually dropping here a little bit. Well, we can probably bring our queen into the game or something. The engine actually doesn't like that much. Let's see, what does the engine like here? Like, do we see some sort of pawn up? Wow, okay, yeah, that's actually super obvious. Yeah, you can't take this because here we're completely winning. Okay, so the game went on. White decided to castle and we see pawn to b5. Black is keeping up with the strategy of not playing principal chess. And here white played the move knight to e5, which is a little bit ooga booga. I can very quickly see this go wrong, where white gets their queen to, let's say, g5, h5, something like that. And here black plays the move pawn f6, which is not a good move. White didn't find the reason why it wasn't a good move. Moves like f6 are super weakening to your king. This is, by the way, true if you've castled or if your king is still in the center. Why? Well, it weakens some of the light squares around your king side. We also don't have any pieces defending this side of the board at the moment. So here white has a lot of counterplay after the move queen d1. Actually, I think. Wait, am I getting my ass handed to me by Stockfish? No, I think it's the top engine move. Let me check this. Yeah, okay, queen d1. Yeah. Beautiful move, right? This will get you that double exclamation mark. The point is you can't really take because of this check. Here, let me give you a line. Queen h5, pawn g6, bishop g6, right? Here we simply win the game. But okay, white is rated 400. They don't see that. I will say, apart from the fact that we've lost a piece, for this elo level, white's actually playing kind of good. Which is kind of why it's so sad that they started cheating, because they completed development, they got their king castles, they blundered a piece, but to be honest, that is a very fixable problem. But I digress. So here black played the move pawn d5, and here we see pawn a4. Okay, this makes no sense. Now the idea is actually not that bad. It just fails for very concrete reasons. Like if black, let's say, castles over here and we take, here they get the move bishop a6. This leads to further simplifications, which is not what white wants here. But the idea is actually pretty alright. Breaking open the other side of the board, starting an attack. It's very clear that black is underdeveloped, so we do have to look for pawn breaks. Over here you can better prepare it by playing a move like rook to e1. Simply getting the rook of this diagonal and getting it honestly to a better line as well. Here if black castles, the move pawn a4 starts making a lot more sense. Right, let's say knight moves out, now these captures, bishop a6. We can simply dock the exchange. I checked it with the computer. The correct plan is actually kind of beautiful. So it is very clear that we need to get play on the king side. Here the computer suggests the move queen b1. The main idea being we're gonna break with c4. And here we're creating a threat against h7. I mean, it's still completely losing, of course, but this is really interesting actually. So black plays knight d7. I appreciate the fact that after we spend like 5 moves doing nothing, we finally bring more pieces into the game. Here white takes. They take back and we take. Okay, we can see that we can win a pawn, so we win a pawn. And bishop a6. This is a really good move actually. We're up material, so let's trade some pieces. Also, this bishop is quite active and all your pawns are on knight squares. So they take, we take back, and here we see rook to e1. Another good move. We're aligning the rook with the king. The problem is black can just castle and have a completely reasonable position. But as you can see by the color changing, that is not what black did. No. They played the far more sensible and logical pawn to g5, because this pawn hasn't been pushed yet. And after the move pawn to c3, well, we can attack a knight, so we attack a knight. The knight goes to h4, and here plays the very unfortunate pawn to e5, and is worse. Now, white took, which is not the correct response. Let's just appreciate this evil bar for a second, or just this position in general. Like, what is going on here? But okay, white takes. Like I said, clearly not cheating yet. They take back. And here, white played a move that I simply can't comprehend. Like, actually, try and guess it. Try and guess the move. Did you guess knight g6? If you did, you're probably lying. Black took, and I mean, this game is over, right? Like rook f8, we double up. I mean, even at the 400 elo level, you can convert this, right? Like, this is just so clearly winning. And here we resigned. So clearly a promising chess player that just recently started. So of course, on the same day, he played a game with 99% accuracy. So let's check that out. So our protagonist here has the black pieces, and the game started with e4, e5. All right, knight f3, knight c6. And here white played the Ruy Lopez. And here black plays the move knight f6, which is called the Berlin defense. The Ruy Lopez is maybe one of the most studied positions in all of chess. So essentially every legal move here has a name. Like, I don't even know what g5 is, but that's apparently the Brentano gambit. And knight f6 is called the Berlin defense. Now, what happens in the Berlin defense? Well, white castles, which is the correct reply. And usually here, black takes the pawn. That's only a very temporary pawn sacrifice after a move like pawn d4. But you really can't engage with this pawn capture, as the open e-file is deadly. So instead you drop back to d6. There are multiple ways you can play this. Usually white engages with this capture over here and then takes the pawn. Here the queens get traded, and this is the famous Berlin Wall defense. But okay, black here decided to play bishop to e7. I think Stockfish gives this as a move. Yeah, Stockfish here thinks it's either the third or the second engine move. This was the only centi pawn loss. For the rest, they played perfect. It's just ridiculous. Here, this pawn is, of course, hit, so white decides to defend it. Now, knight c3 is a good move. Usually, though, in the Ruy Lopez, you defend it with the rook. Here we can play c3 and then build towards d4. Which is why, preferably, you don't want to put your knight on c3. But absolutely nothing wrong with it. Pawn d6. And here, white makes the first, well, sort of mistake. Pawn a3. Why do I say that? In the opening, the main strategic consideration is center control. a3 does not do much to control the center. There are moments when you see these pawns being moved. Like, for example, pawn h3 is a very common move at multiple stages of the Ruy Lopez. Usually, though, that is because black is a bit lacking on space. So in that case, using your pawns to control squares, especially to pieces that can sometimes actively develop in ways that undermine the center, becomes useful. a3, however, doesn't do that. This bishop is firmly locked outside the pawn chain, no piece is gonna come to b4, and it does nothing to directly control the center. If you were to ask me, the only good move, there are of course more, but stay with me, is the move pawn to d4, which is the most direct way of attacking the center. Now, black doesn't have to engage with this capture, but it is actually a good idea in this case to do so. And after white takes back, here I think we're essentially forced to play a move like bishop to d7, and we can clearly tell white simply enjoys a nice space advantage with this central pawn over here, and more actively placed pieces. So nothing concretely winning yet, this is just a nice healthy advantage. But okay, they play pawn to a3 because they're rated 800, and that's completely fine. Except of course when you're playing Stockfish. They castle. Here white plays the move pawn h3, which isn't actually as bad as a3 is. I will say though, in the opening, if your candidate moves are these bunny ears, at least try and come up with an alternative, because usually there are better moves. Like for example here, still pawn d4, super reasonable. Also moves like pawn h3, they're kind of preventing your opponents from making mistakes. Right, so let's say we go pawn d4. Is this pin ever a problem here? Well, we can simply take a look. So we pin the knight. It would be nice if we could take here. However, right now, taking back with the knight is a bit of a problem. So let's start by bishop takes knight. We take back, pawn takes back. Now we trade the queens. Here we simply lose a pawn. Meaning here, black essentially has to take the knight. We take back. And here, white is probably the only side that can be slightly better with a bit more of a healthy pawn structure. So moves like pawn h3, they're kind of preventing your opponent from making a mistake. And here, black played a move that surprised me a little bit while I was going through the game at first. They played the move knight to d4. I mean, it makes sense on some level. White really should have taken the knight on the last move. So this move is, of course, dodging that exchange. But it's still a really funny line. Let's say white decides, I'm gonna engage with this capture. So they take, we take back. Now here you might think that after knight d5, what is the idea? It is not to take on e4, because this pin is simply too dangerous. And something like knight c6, we can always take and retreat the bishop. The main idea seems to be to take. Now we both end up with this pawn structure. And after something like bishop f6, we kind of free our position a bit. And the computer quite likes the idea of trade in the light square bishops. But while this pawn structure looks a bit weird, it is not incredibly hard to tell that in this position we've kind of killed off old play. This equalizes for black. White played the move pawn to d3. This unfortunately gives up the bishop pair, meaning that now black kind of has something to work with. We have to do bishops, so our strategic goal should be to open up the position. Okay, so we see bishop to e6 and pawn c4. This move is unfortunately a bit of a mistake. Now on a conceptual level it makes some sense. Black has the bishop pair, meaning they want to open the position, and this move does clamp down on the d5 square. It does unfortunately fail, because while the move c4 clamps down on the d5 square, black still has multiple pawn breaks available, either via f5 or c6 d5. So we haven't really exactly stopped black's plans. However, this move does create weaknesses in white's position, like the d4 square and the d3 pawn. Okay, so here you see the move pawn c6, the knight gets kicked, and here you see the move knight to d7. Now we can't break with d5 yet, because this leaves the e5 pawn unprotected. So black seems to be going with a strategy, or at least Stockfish seems to be going with a strategy of let's play f5, which yeah, looks really good here. White here plays the move pawn b4, and here we see the pawn break f5. Now white here actually played a really good move, pawn takes pawn, and I like that they did this. Well yes, we help our opponent improve a piece while targeting a weakness, so it isn't of course something you'd like to do. You are forced to do this though, like let's say we just play a move like bishop e2, here black has to move pawn f4, and this you simply can't allow. Like here the center is a bit unflexible, and black is already very well mobilized on the king side, meaning that let's say we kind of do nothing, here we very quickly get moves like pawn g5 and pawn g4, and this is just simply winning. Okay, so white didn't allow black to play f4, so instead we took back, and pawn g4 was played, and this is really the first big mistake. Yes, black was already strategically a bit better with the bishop pair and pretty good attacking possibilities, mainly against the d3 pawn. g4 is simply too weakening. White has actually played a very admirable game against Stockfish. You have to be a bit careful sometimes when pushing pawns in front of your king, and while sometimes people are too scared of pushing these pawns, right now we can see that the f-file is open, right? So this move does in fact destabilize the knight. So after a move like bishop g6, now this queen has to constantly babysit this piece. And more importantly, we kind of do it for no good reason. The bishop stands just as well on g6, where it still targets the weakness, as it does on f5. So white here played the move pawn b5. This can be safely ignored. So we play knight to c5, which is a really nice move by the way, further pressure in this weak point. White decides to exchange, which makes some sense. And here this pawn is hanging. White, seeing that they can't defend this pawn, decide that they're gonna push it. And black here spotted a simple but very disgusting little move, exploiting the fact that pawn g4 weakened the knight, and they played knight to b3. Simple tactic, but simple tactics win chess games, right? So white decided to engage with this capture over here. We took the knight back, and here we have a lot of problems. Like for example, there's a pin going on over here. So right now black has a threat of taking this pawn. White decides I'm gonna take here. This unfortunately simply loses. Why? Here we have to move rook b8, and turns out we just can't protect this knight. White thinks yes I can, black says no you can't. And as you can imagine, here black of course converted the game. So we ended with a nice little rook sacrifice and checkmate to follow. So yeah, as you can imagine, they got banned for cheating. I mean, they played a lot more games afterwards, but I do find it telling that they made the account on December 30th, and a week later they were already banned. So that's actually pretty nice. So yeah, don't cheat, you look really obvious. So if you like this video, make sure to watch this one. YouTube thinks you like it, I worked hard on it, or at least I tried my best. And I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.